Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm Jackie Mader. I'm a reporter at the Hechinger Report, where I cover early childhood education. I'm so excited to be moderating this panel today because play is something I have been increasingly writing about as more and more research comes out about the benefits of play for children. Some research I recently covered even found play is so powerful it can reduce the achievement gap seen in young children. And as I'm sure we have all heard, other research has shown play has an important role in helping children cope with anxiety and mental health concerns, which is especially important now during COVID times. So with that, I'd love to jump into our discussion about how play can support student learning and well-being. Today, we are joined by three experts on this topic. They are going to introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, as we're starting the conversation, we'd love to invite those of you watching to share in the chat what play means to you. So feel free to start sharing that. And we are going to turn to our panelists. Alexa, let's start with you. Can you give a brief introduction of yourself and talk about how play has been a part of your work? And then we'll have Alison and Aman go after you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexa Sorden, and I'm the founding principal of Concourse Village Elementary School, located in the South Bronx, New York City. And when I think about how play has been a part of my work, I don't think I've played as much as I've hoped to play. But when I think about how I embed play into the work that we do, it's often through ways that we can engage in review lessons with students. So things like Kahoot or Time to Climb. So when I think about play in my work, I think about how do I get creative in bringing it into the classroom.
Thank you so much. Alison, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about play in your work, please?
Sure. So I'm Alison Perkins Cohen. I'm the Chief of Staff for Baltimore City Schools. And we have really made sure that play is a key part of what we're offering students. We have kind of three foundational aspects of that we focus on, which is called our blueprint. And our three areas are literacy, leadership, and wholeness. And in part of student wholeness is really making sure that we're addressing all aspects of what makes students excited about learning, makes them who they are, their passions. And part of that is play, and really making sure that we're engaging students at all levels, the physicality, the need to get exercise, the need to get up and move around. And so that's a key part of what we try to make sure that all our students have access to.
Wonderful, thank you. Aman, last but not least, we'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and how you are involved with play.
Well, it's great to be here, coming in from Boston, where I'm an associate professor of computing and innovation at the Olin College of Engineering right outside of Boston. And I run the Extending Access to STEM Empowerment Lab. And that is shaping the way that people play with technology in ways that allow them to do so at very young ages, and in the same mode of play that they normally interact with their peers and in kindergarten settings, but bring in computation and other technologies to that space so that play can be a part of their technological explorations, building things up to break them down, and being able to make the rules of a game and change the rules just like you do on a playground, but in a computational setting. And that's where I intersect with play.
Thank you so much. So the first question I have is for all three panelists to answer. Why is it important to highlight the importance of play, especially now? And how can play tie in with academic achievement and engagement and address inequities in our education system? So who would like to take that first? Alison, thank you.
I'm happy to start. So I think one thing in Baltimore that we've really realized, and I think across the country and around the world, we've really realized, is that people think of school as being about teaching kids to read and do math. But what we've really seen with the closure of schools around the world is that it is much, much more than that. It's about connecting with students. It's about connecting with communities. It's about a sense of belonging. And it's about passion and fun at school. And students have really missed that. And we've seen that when students are at home, engaging with students virtually is just not the same. And part of that is that lost connection to peers and to adults who care about them. And part of it is the sense of play. I think we have really ingenious teachers who have tried to work that into virtual learning and come up with creative ways. I mean, I actually was in a physical classroom the other day where, you know, like many of our classrooms right now, we have some students who are in person and some students are at home. So she's trying to keep both engaged and does things like create little challenges where students, if they get answers right, or if they attend, if there's larger attendance rates, or they set certain goals, then she has to do something. And so the thing I walked in the classroom was when she was standing on her head, because that was one of the things that if students got to a certain goal, they could get the teacher to stand on her head. So I think our teachers have been really creative at trying to make play part of what they're doing, but it is just not the same as being in person. And I think we've seen that in our attendance rates. I think we've seen that in the outcomes of students, academic outcomes, and how really being attentive to the whole child and all aspects of their personality is really important. And that's what school is about. And that's what we've been missing.
Thank you so much. Aman or Alexa, do you guys have any other thoughts on that?
I'll defer to Alexa, or I can jump in, whatever.
Go ahead,
Aman. So, play intersecting with equity in schools and outside of schools has been a passion of mine, because we are seated in such deep inequities as is becoming more visible over the past year. And some of the ways that's played out has been people feeling agency in their own learning settings and in their own neighborhoods, and feeling empowered and ownership of places as instrumental to kids' lives, such as playgrounds. A lot of people don't have the space that they need nearby to be able to do play on playgrounds. The schools don't have those as resources, or things are in a state of disrepair. And the classrooms barely have room for the learning when there's 35 on 1, let alone time for play outside of the math and the reading rigor. So that's not the case for all neighborhoods and all schools. And so finding ways where play, which is how we start life being very playful and exploratory. And we also start very scientifically by testing out things. And that's one of the means of learning that should not be taken away in a school setting or based on where a person lives. So by having increased access and the ability to play in some of the many ways, physical play, pretend play, all the ways that are important, you can do those in your home, in your neighborhood, and in the classroom as a way to connect all of the dots, because learning in a vacuum is not teaching the whole child. They can't bring their playful self into the space. You can't just be a student. And so I think that we need to allow people to bring their whole selves into all of the spaces, feel safe to do so, feel that you're not going to be labeled as a person that is being disruptive and be suspended at disproportionate rates based on your background, and that you can feel safe in your communities and playing and all of those. I think tying play together through all those threads is very important, and we need to address some of the places where it is not as readily available for all students.
Thank you so much, Aman. All really excellent points. And Alexa, going to you now, you're in a school every single day. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, especially if you've seen play tie into academic achievement and engagement and address inequities.
Yeah, when I think about that question in terms of the academic achievement and engagement, so you need the engagement so that I could academically achieve, right? So you need to be able to get my attention, get me to want to learn this content, get me to want to come to school, get me excited about coming to school. And when I think about what happens when that's not seen, then that's when those inequities really start to show up in terms of the educational system, because the academic gap widens. So it plays a vital role in terms of how are we creating a playful environment. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that so that we can increase engagement so that we increase academic achievement. So some things that come to mind is if I'm teaching nursery rhymes, and how could I help students reenact that in the classroom? How do I make it come to life with them? So how do you take what already exists? Because I know that something Aman mentioned was like, well, we obviously have to keep that rigor and think about how are we teaching, what are we teaching our scholars every day? And how does play come into that when I'm already potentially dealing with having to close a gap. So then how do you take what you already have to deliver anyway and present it in a way that's lots of fun for kids?
Can I piggyback off of that? I know we have to move through a lot of questions, but how do you present things in a fun way for kids? And I do want to just give an example of like how splats in a classroom, the unruly splats that have the feature to record your own sounds and play them out through a splat allows a teacher to, like, personalization can sometimes be play, which is if you make an elephant sound or something where you get to be silly and you still get to have the lesson and have a little bit of you in it, you invite the kids to put themselves in it as well, and relationships to see like what animal does a person go to? What is their spirit animal? Just even as a part of one particular section, putting yourself in there, and it leads to the play and the relationships that can lead to more educational opportunities, which allows people to have alternate opportunities for themselves and potentially decrease the number of people that don't see many options that end up on playgrounds doing some of the more negative things that stop other people from coming there. So trying to use these spaces that we have in the classrooms to get people engaged and maintain the engagement so that people can have a fruitful lives, and also open up opportunities to keep the other spaces safe for play outside of school. So it's all connected.
Thank you so much, Aman. And I do want to get into more examples like that later on, because I think that's really helpful for people watching to have examples. So thank you. Alexa and Alison, I want to circle back to you two quickly, because somewhat related to what we were just talking about, but researchers are also seeing increased rates of stress and anxiety among children nationwide. I'm sure we've all seen the reports and articles on this. I'm wondering if you're thinking about the role of play in addressing these types of challenges, and if so, how? What does that look like? Alison, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So building on what Alexa talked about is, we have to get students we've really lost connection with too many of our students at this time. There are students who we just haven't seen enough of at this time, and have had long periods where they really have not engaged in school because school hasn't really served them the way they wanted it to. And so we have some students who I know are working down at the Amazon Skills Center who have just decided that, let us know when you're back in person, but in the meantime, I'm just not going to be engaged. And so we need to attract those students back. And there are some students who are going to come back because they love schoolwork. But there are a lot of students who they're really going to be connected back because of connections they have with the school community, or because the other aspects of school that they like. It could be play, it could be art, it could be sports, it could be music. There's any number of reasons why students are connected, but we have to make sure that we're making school interesting for students and engaging them effectively to be a place where they want to be. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that and make sure that we're tapping into all students' passions and all their natural talents. So play is one way of doing that. I know I've seen the students, when you see students come back, it's like blossoming, like they're like opening up back to the students that they were before, in terms of really, and I've talked to parents who feel this way too, that they thought their child was doing okay, and their child was doing okay. They were doing okay in math and reading, or in school, they were doing okay. But when they went back to school in person, one quote I remember is, I had my child back, that they're seeing their child come. They didn't even realize the degree to which their child was not quite engaged and was probably having low level depression, or I forget, there's a psychological term that's not quite depression. It'll come back to me, but a kind of, malaise of, not being engaged. And when students are going back to school, we're seeing them open back up to the students that they really are, to the human beings that they really are. And those connections with their peers, connections with adults, and ability to have fun. And when you go visit a school now, Alexa was talking about it before we started, and you hear children on the playground, that is just such a refreshing sound that has been all too lacking for so many students for too long.
Thank you so much, Alison. Alexa, what about you? Have you thought about play, or is that something you're using to address stress and anxiety among students?
Absolutely. So when I think about the onset of the pandemic and just remember where we thought it was airborne, where you surfaces, and there was just so many fears that were projected onto our scholars when we thought about how do we ease that stress and anxiety when they're in front of us, and obviously when they're also virtual. So one of the things that we did to decrease that, when I think about play, it's not always just in the technical term of playing a game. I think about the feeling. What does it feel like? So I think about is this joyful? Is there laughter? So things like transitions became even more so important than ever. We've always had transitions where when students were coming into the classroom, we give hugs and there's lots of things, but we knew because of COVID and stress and anxiety and all those other things, how do we still keep those things that were really important to us and still embed them in like no touch ways? So our students come in and we do a foot shake, we do a wiggle dance. So we already start the day like, we look at you, how do you want to be greeted today? Some may say, I want namaste. Some may say, give me a foot shake, a wiggle. When they come in, there's music playing and they're dancing. And like, we're just getting just really excited about the day. We have funny idioms that we start with, when pigs fly. And just what does that mean? Like when it comes up in a novel that we're reading. So we find many ways to make those connections. So, and it's the attitude that the teacher brings into the room. So how playful am I? How excited am I to see you? How are we playfully transitioning throughout the day? Are we transitioning from the carpet to your seat while doing the cha-cha? Like, what are all the things that we're doing so that we're engaging in movement, but also that you can see, like, I'm still a kid, the teacher's having fun, we're all having fun. And then how does that transition into our virtual setting as well? So yes, I've totally thought about that in terms of thinking about the stress and anxiety that both teachers and students have faced.
We're all visual learners out here, so we're going to need to see you demonstrate the wiggle dance and the cha-cha between them. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Amon. Thank you, Alexa. Well, so that actually leads into the next question I was wondering about. I'd love to hear how you all have seen, play positively impact student well-being and learning during the pandemic. So, Alexa, you had some excellent examples there of what you're doing. I'd love to hear if there are any other specific examples. Amon, you had some also. Any other examples of how you're seeing play, how you're using it, how you're seeing it used, and how it's positively impacting students right now during this COVID time? I'll let Amon or Alison, maybe one of you wants to go first.
I'll jump in with the last question related to anxiety. And some of anxiety is from uncertainty, and we entered a very uncertain time. So when you have activities, at least where I live in the intersection of play and STEM, a lot of STEM and engineering is about embracing uncertainty and doing activities that you don't know what is going to happen. So when you're doing things like trying to make a sequence of things happen and tell a story and play sounds associated with that story, and you see that the sound is repeated right after each other. So you don't know if it's going to play all the way out or if it's going to cut off and just go all the way through them. And just seeing people work through that, like not knowing what's going to happen, you see like that engagement allows you to focus in on something that is not the pandemic around you, but it also says, you're engaging in, okay, things are uncertain, but I'm going to get through whatever is going to happen with this. And then I'm going to have another chance to try to get through it. So that trying again and trying to get through something is something that can be applied outside. So just the deep focus. And then when you get into the state of flow, the psychological state, when you're in trying to figure something out, like, how do I get these sounds to trigger right? You're in a good state, but it also says, it's uncertain what's going to happen, but eventually I'll find a way to get through it. And people can usually at least enjoy that escape time. And two, maybe see that uncertainty as something that you can manage because you really need a lot of that in these uncertain times. All of us do.
Thank you so much, Amon. Alison, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one way that has been really helpful that's been easy to see is that, I think building on what Amon said about the anxiety, there's a lot of anxiety at this time. And some of that is the circumstances in schools that you're seeing right now. We have social distancing in schools. Students are wearing masks all day. They're not supposed to be touching each other. So all that is, it creates an environment. And I know I heard from parents when we were trying to get students back, they're worried about that. Is play going to, I mean, a school going to be a joyful place, or a school, going to be really kind of Soviet era, almost like dark gray, and everybody's just sitting there doing their work kind of thing. And that is not, I think one thing we've really seen is that that has not been the case, but still sitting in your desk in your station all day doing your work is isolating. And so breaking that up so that students have moments, even if it's just by your desk, because there are times when we've just done it by your desk where students just stand up and probably do Alexa's wiggle dance or some other dance where you're standing up and doing something and teach. I've seen kids do the floss thing, or different teachers have different ways of engaging where they just take a moment and they're laughing and they're enjoying each other, and that makes just a huge difference. And then the ability to then get back into the work, and then also outside, going outside and having mask breaks outside. So say socially distance mask breaks, so kids can get out, they can take their mask off, they can run around, they can scream, all those things. Like then for the child to be able to come back in, they've engaged in that movement that is so critical to allow us to then all to be able to concentrate and so on. So I think that those in this moment when you're kind of having to sit at your desk and focus, then those kind of movement breaks are even more important for students right now.
Thank you so much. And Alexa, you already shared a lot of examples, but just wanted to check in if you have any other examples you want to share, or any other ways that you've seen play positively impact your students in terms of well-being and learning during the pandemic.
So one of the things that we wanted to do at our school was also see what were our students' interests, and among us, it's like something they're totally interested in. So the teachers took it upon themselves to broker deals in terms of like, if whoever completes the most work, then I'm going to play Among Us with you. So they had a really great time teaching the teachers how to play Among Us. So they were able to do that with students at home and students in person. So during their lunch break, they would play Among Us together. And then it became a Among Us in person live. And then they recreated the game in person. So that was loads of fun. And I just saw that teachers that were only meeting their students, they were only interacting with their students virtually because that's how they met. There was a shift. So it kind of was like, it wasn't just always business. It's like they really got to see that teacher like kind of like let her guard down, and like really also a level of vulnerability on the teacher's level, because they didn't know how to play Among Us. And then the students became the teacher. And we saw a big shift in relationships that were mostly the virtual ones, because those were our students that were remote. So we saw a big shift in how they were interacting with the teacher, where they were more present and they had a greater desire to want to be online with their teacher who was playing Among Us with them.
That's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing. So a lot of people may be watching this saying like, this all sounds great, but how do we get this to happen? So I'm wondering, how do you create this culture of play in schools? How do you get teacher buy-in or even district buy-in? Because I've talked to teachers who say like, I would love to do more play, but I have my pacing guide, or I have to follow what the district is saying, or curriculum. So yeah, how do you get buy-in? How do you shift to this culture on top of the pressure to do high, testing and follow your pacing guide or curriculum? Alison, I'm wondering if maybe you can start us off with your thoughts.
Sure. I mean, I think what you see with really good teachers is that they, I think as Aman said earlier, they just incorporate it into what they're doing. It's not a separate activity. It can be incorporated into what they're doing. So if you're, you can incorporate into the text that you're reading, you can incorporate it into a poetry that you're reading and acting out parts of it. You can incorporate it into math, adding things, bodies being added. You see teachers doing that. So it doesn't have to be a separate activity. I mean, just getting up and moving around it can be, part of it. I mean, one way that you sometimes see teachers incorporated is we do asymptomatic testing now for COVID, and that too was something that there was some anxiety about, that would be stressful for students. We have not found that to be the case, and partly it's the way the teachers approach it is that the students get up, we do pool testing, they do self-administered nasal swabs, and they get up and they do it and they put a thing and they enjoy the heck out of it, like boogers down, so they get to put their boogers down. And so like that, just making everything fun and understanding the science of it. You can incorporate play into anything you do to make it fun and physical and really interact with students at all levels. And so I think that good teachers are really good at that, and just it's part of who they are. And that's why so many teachers are the holders of all these holiday sweaters and so on, because they are always thinking about how to make their school environment fun, and they're really good at it.
Thank you so much. Alexa, thoughts from you? I don't know if you've come across this in your school or your district. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm naturally playful and joyful, so it's something that just kind of like just emits throughout the building. And some of the things that we also did as a school community is like, how am I being playful with my teachers as well? So like we still did our Secret Santa virtually. We still, we had virtual baby showers. We still did birthday shout outs. So we still kept a lot of the things that made us like a really tight knit community. And we just continued to embed that throughout this entire pandemic. And that idea of that culture of play, I still go back to like that feeling of what does it feel like to be in your building and how, you know, how joyful you feel. And that's something that our teachers feel for me, which then goes down to what students experience as well. But then just like what I mentioned and what Alison built on as well, it's the curriculum and how do you find opportunities in the curriculum to make it exciting. So when we're even talking about theme, we'll take songs that they really love. So like we use many Billie Eilish songs to say like, what's the theme? Give me a tagline. What was the message that she wanted to share when we're trying to connect back to a central theme? Or what was the message? Or did the author portray the message that they wanted in this artwork? Well, did that come through in this song? So we find different ways to engage them. And when we think about test scores, well, everything that you'll ever read says students need to be safe. They need to feel that they belong. They need to know that you see them. They need to see themselves in what you're teaching. So when you're able to do all of that, the test scores naturally just come up.
Awesome.
In a good way.
Thank you. Aman, I know that was mostly aimed at Alexa and Alison. Do you have any thoughts that you wanted to add before I go to the next question?
Well, I could just amplify some of the things that they said, which is, you know, that's who they are and seeing you, right? You know, a lot of times when we talk about like being an engineer and teaching engineers, it's, you know, doing engineering and you're an engineer, but it's actually a people to people process. We always have to remind people like that people are the beginning and the end. So when you say teacher, and student is a person and a person. So the teacher, a lot of times where they're not always entering the playful spaces when they think they need to be a teacher instead of being a person. And so like, oh, the teacher needs to command respect and these sort of things, but I think you can get the respect by being you. So that's just like, it's who they are. And, you know, and seeing each other on the both sides, just remembering that there's people behind every label and you get caught up in trying to be that thing as opposed to who you are sometimes. And that is what squeezes play out of some things.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm curious, so with budgets already stretched, I mean, maybe you can get buy-in, but I'm wondering, how do you justify the cost or, you know, argue for the cost of building playgrounds or the physical infrastructure designed purely for play or even materials that are meant mostly for play? How do you kind of justify that? How do you find the money for this? Alexa, maybe starting with you first, if you don't mind sharing.
So budgets are tight, you know, and we have to think about, again, the curriculum materials and what can I bring into a classroom to really make it fun and exciting. So like when our students were learning about, they were engaged in an informational unit which looked at ocean life. So we thought about how do we bring the teacher, how do we get them really excited? So the teacher like dressed up as an octopus. Like, so we got materials for like, she's wearing like an octopus outfit. Then we got kids like these other octopuses that they could wear octopi, I think it's called. We got sharks, we got tanks. Like we were just getting all types of things where they could get their hands on the material that they were learning about. So and the resources they were learning about. So we think about, again, our curriculum. Those are things that we usually plan for from April to April. So we'll look at our curriculum, we'll say, what are the materials that would really make this loads of fun so that when they're reenacting something, so they're learning about ocean life, well, we would want to see them embed the informational, the content that they learned and use it in a narrative nonfiction. So they would need the sharks, they would need the octopus, they would need all these items to then retell using real information, which will then serve as an assessment for, did you get what did you learn what you were supposed to learn about ocean life or what have you. So we think about how to make purchases for that. We also were able to purchase flats. And that was a way, like Aman was mentioning it earlier about that computational setting. And we were able to bring that into our physical education classrooms. So where I was able to pair my PE teacher with my coding teacher. And then we were able to bring play inside. Obviously it's physical education, so you're expecting them to engage in physical education, but this was different type of play where they were recreating their own games. And in New York City, we tend to have harsh winters. So it was really great to see them really engaged throughout the winter months using in the computational setting, if that makes sense. So in terms of making justifications or how do I find ways to get the materials that I need, there are other costs that I cut. So I'm really, I plan well, like I'll get all the copy paper that's needed for the next 3 years. So I'll have money left over in my budget for next year for something like that. So I just look at my budget and say, what are the things that I know I'm going to use often that I actually have extra money for now, so that then I can make different decisions for the next school year, if that makes sense. So like I'll front load some of my resources because I know that I really want to get this for my students. We also cut back on per session, which means overtime. So things like that, if needed, we have to cut back in that area so that I could get the resources that are important for our students to learn.
Thank you so much. Alison, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yesterday, when we were talking about this, you brought up some really interesting partnerships happening in Baltimore. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I'm sure Aman has great partnerships in Boston too.
Yeah.
But yeah. So it's a real issue, the budget issue. And so we really have had struggles with that. And so we really have done a lot of it through partnerships. We've had to do that through partnerships. And the equity issues that Aman framed earlier are a significant issue for us too, in terms of access to play equipment, and in terms of access to sports, access to fields and so on. And so we've been very strategic. We've had to create strategic partnerships and prioritization in order to really address those equity gaps. So we are a system that the enrollment has declined in Baltimore in past years. And so we have had to close schools. So that's one way in which, when we do that, we've been very thoughtful about how to do that in a way that is it tries to actually provide a better opportunity for students. So in neighborhoods where we've had maybe two schools and both are underutilized, if we're closing one and it's going to be absorbed in the other school, one key way we've done this is that we did through a partnership with the state legislature and the city, we do have a rebuilding effort that we are paying for partly, but to renovate 28 buildings. And we emphasize those buildings in communities that were particularly impacted by disinvestment over generations. They're historically redlined neighborhoods and they have low enrollment. And so those are the neighborhoods where we infuse those resources and reason that if your school is closing, you should get first dibs on a new building. So those buildings come with play space, they come with new fields. And that was like one way to really prioritize those neighborhoods. So that was one strategic thing we did. Then we also, we have maximized to the nth degree those facilities in terms of absorbing students from closing schools. But then we also sometimes we have closed other schools, and so then we've looked for outside partners how to partner with that. So Kaboom is one of those partners, and then Heart of America is another entity we partner with. And again, we've really strategized that to be, instead of being kind of that those partners are kind of doing projects where they have relationships or develop them, we've really worked with them to really focus them on where we see the biggest equity gap. So if again, a school is closing and is absorbing and going into another school, then Heart of America will help us beautify the space. And a lot of time that focuses on gym space or play space. And then also Kaboom will then often put a playground in place. So we just over the break, Kaboom with the Ravens as the partner, put together a new playground at one of our schools that was absorbing students from a closing school at Edgecombe. The Circle is the name of the school. So we've tried to be really thoughtful about that. And then also another partnership with Under Armour and the Ravens is putting uniforms on all students. They cover all the uniforms for our students in high school, our student athletes. They also do professional learning for our coaches and our athletic directors to make sure that they're getting being treated as professionals about how they work with students to use sports to really help talk about team building, about sportsmanship, and so that is those kinds of investments to really make sure that we're giving high quality athletic experiences to students, and treating them as a serious student athlete and athlete scholars that they are, and giving them that access. So for us, it's really been about creating strategic partnerships to really drive investment in neighborhoods that have been underinvested in for too long.
Thank you so much, Allison. Those are such interesting partnerships, really creative ways to hit at this. Aman, I wanted to ask you specifically a STEM related question, since you're in this intersection, as you said, of STEM and play. Can you talk a little bit about how you have seen play lead to more equitable STEM learning opportunities for students, especially for those who may not see themselves in STEM typically?
Yeah, I can start where, Alison gave a beautiful description about some of the urgency for changing patterns of people that are not getting access to quality education. And there's all the ripple effects of that. And, I can go back to, I was raised in Portland, Oregon, but, I was in a school system in my neighborhood that did have a revelation of here's where all the resources are going, and here in the city we should focus. And I was able to learn the program as a result of that, because I landed in the Harriet Tubman Middle School that had adequate computer lab, and that's where I was able to get in touch with some of the programming that allowed me to ultimately, as a graduate student, be one of the people that introduced the Scratch programming language that's used in a lot of schools right now. And so because I found that passion at a young age, it charted a course where you mentioned some of the affordability as well. The Scratch programming language, right now it's Scratch Week, and the Scratch Foundation always makes the Scratch programming language free for everyone. So it's never been a paid tool, so that people that want to get in touch with playful computing and telling stories and putting themselves in, those were some of the driving principles. And I'll tell a quick story about the intersection of play, and that helped Scratch become what it was, which is one of the times we were just getting the tool ready for prime time and working with a group in the Clubhouse network. There was a student who was disengaged with the workshop and not really engaging in ways that we thought would be fun. And what that person was doing instead was, instead of engaging, I tried to throw as much as I can, because if you haven't figured out, I'm a pretty playful person, workshop facilitator, and nothing was working. But I asked one day, what are you listening to? If it's more interesting to be listening on your headphones than engaging. And it was a song that had a dance. It was the Harlem Shake, and showed, it wasn't the Harlem Shake, it was the student was from Harlem, and it was doing the chicken noodle soup, that dance. And so we programmed that dance in the Scratch. So he put himself in and he was dancing, and he became the teacher of, okay, here's what this new dance is. Let me do it programmatically. And was simultaneously, using the tool in all the ways that we thought it should be used, and becoming and trying on a new identity at the same time, and making an expression. And peers were starting to recognize him, not just for being a good dancer, for being a person that could really be fluid with the programming. And so that playful engagement with Scratch helped us see like we're on the right track. And it also, helped keep play at the core, like, the elements that we thought were important, putting yourself in. I mentioned that earlier. That's having the tools that support that. And so you see some of the DNA, being one of the founding advisors of Unruly Splats. The splats are physical devices that you do have to raise resources for, but the way of programming them that's been helping in remote settings is that we always made the app free, so that, you may be limited by physical devices, but anyone in the school and anyone remotely can play with the virtual setting. So there's some of that, trying to keep the access high and create when you do have a device, you can do more colorful and playful in the space, and you can really light a gym up with those devices. But it also has some of the DNA of making wide scale joy and play and programming, which has come in handy in the remote times. So we're trying to lean into that, but it comes from some of those stories about, like, it goes back to the neighborhoods that needed reinvestment when everything was going away, and trying to keep that as a part of all the efforts that I've been doing from scratch to Unruly to Olin College and my lab.
So now sorry, Jackie.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
I want to see Amon do the chicken noodle soup.
I love it.
Thank you. Well, so we already have some questions coming in, and we had some questions submitted from when you all registered. So I'm going to hop to one of the questions we have. This is for Alison. Alison, can you speak a bit more specifically to the work assessing play space inequity system-wide with Kaboom?
Yeah. So again, when we first, so Kaboom has had a partnership with Baltimore City Schools for a long time, but when Dr. Santelises came in as the CEO, we started trying to align resources a little bit more strategically than they had been across multiple partners. So with Kaboom, what that looked like was we really decided we need to do an assessment of, we have not been investing very much in playgrounds for a long time because we just haven't had the resources to do it. So we needed an assessment of where were the biggest gaps in terms of play space. And so Kaboom helped us doing a review of schools to prioritize the ones that were in greatest need, so that we would kind of have an ongoing list of that. And then again, we cross-reference that list with our portfolio work. So if there is a school closing, then we also look at that as a priority too, to create better options for students when schools merge, since we have a strong commitment to that. And then similarly with Heart of America, when we started with them, they do beautification of dilapidated spaces, and so when we started partnering with them, we too did a kind of beautification prioritization list, because that is again something that we have not been able to do for schools for a long time. The resources we receive for facilities is significantly below what any industry standard would should say we should have for our facilities, and our facilities are already in the worst condition in the state of Maryland. And so we, when the resources we get are just tip of the iceberg, they're touching HVAC systems and roofs and windows that are leaking, that are way all those way past their lifespan. We have given up on things like beautification. We have one painter for the entire system. We don't paint buildings anymore. We can't. And so we use the partnership with Heart of America to again prioritize spaces based on their needs for beautification, so that then we can really be strategic about that resource when we utilize it. And they too, like I said, are very helpful in play space and in gyms, really taking gyms that were way past a facelift and prioritizing them. And then Under Armour has focused on our high school gymnasium, so has been replacing all of our high school gymnasiums, which has been hugely helpful, so that we have the athletic facilities that our student athletes should have.
Thank you so much. Just a reminder to anyone watching, you can submit a question in the Q&A if you hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I have a few more questions that were submitted, but feel free to write a question at any point. You can also put them in the chat.
It can be a playful question too. It could be a playful question. It could be a playful question. Playful
questions. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Aman. So here's a question. How do you help parents engage and participate in this mission? I think that's a great question. Any thoughts from any of you who would like to answer that?
I'm happy to start. I'm sure Alexa and Aman will have things to add too. I mean, again, I think you can create games that students can recreate at home too. So I think in the virtual space, I've seen teachers are creating activities at home that the parents can engage in, and then creating ways for breaks in learning that can be replicated at home. We've seen kids coming up. I mean, sometimes as a student, so in our early days of in-person, when we had students in person, and we weren't, we were trying to have them play outside safely and social distance. They came up with their own version of touchless tag that I, to this day, have no idea exactly what the rules are for this game, but they know the rules, and so they've really engaged that, and then bring that back to their home and into their neighborhood in ways that the families can engage with them as well. So I think what parents have really seen and what we've heard is the value of seeing their students happy and engaged, and then some of that is spilling back home in terms of exercise and engagement outside. And I know when we first saw students coming back, because of the lack of access to activities, we had seen weight gain issues in students. And so I think, giving opportunities for students in school to run around and get exercise is something that then I think they're bringing that back home with this kind of new engagement and thrill and joy about activity.
Thank you so much. Alexa or Aman, anything else to add about parental engagement in this?
So one of the things that we do also, we send videos and photos to our parents where it's showing evidence of joy. So anything that is promoting joy and happiness, this is what your child experienced today. And we didn't do that in the past. We started that now. And it was when we were thinking about those fears of I'm sending my child into the building. What would that feel like? What would that look like? So it started as that to just decrease parent stress, but then those photographs get conversations going in the home. So when the parents are like, oh, what were you doing in class? What is this picture about? Then the child is able to say this is what was happening. And then it just increases communication at home. And then they can also engage in the same activity that they did at school with a family member or a sibling or a parent.
Thank you. Aman.
Yeah, the siblings or the family element. There's lots of different dynamics of how the flow of learning can happen. So everyone who is a part of a student's life can be playful with them, but also can bring in to the play space some of the things that we're all processing collectively. So I think that it also opens up a window where you can say that everything is heavy during a pandemic, and play is something that can already be an established thing within a family structure, from older to younger children to elders. And you can also try out different things and bring in concepts and safely broach topics that because play can be something for processing as well. So not to say that, all of play has to be silly, haha, you can still playfully go, but it also shouldn't be brought entirely over there. So is a way to try to find a balance to deal with, because sometimes creating a world can have some imagined, some very fantastical elements and some very real elements as well, and say, well, how did they get there? Why do that's a way that some people actually talk about. So there you can find powerful connection points to what's going on, and realize that the young people around us do process more than what they're letting on to sometimes, and have that be the invitation to have those and go in and out of that mode to to collectively process and keep the play there. I think that's something that can be done.
Thank you so much. Here's another question we have not really talked about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So someone asked, how are schools evaluating children's play skills and communicating to teachers the importance and value of fostering play skills? Any thoughts on that? I'm wondering if evaluation of play skills is even something that's happening, or if it's, I don't usually hear evaluating with play. So I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So I can, give you some proxies for the conversation, because to some degree, evaluating happens on an artifact to some degree, and people don't always evaluate a process, and some processes to design something, whether you're designing a play experience or designing an artifact, have striking similarities. So sometimes when we're evaluating processes, even at the college level, that can be, can you come up with 50 ideas as part of your process before weeding down, sort of like a double diamond? Like, can you expand the space for design? Can you shrink it down and concentrate? Can you expand it again? And so you can do that for actual things that you're going to build or playful settings and still have this similar process. So you can assess whether someone has a process that can be used for things that are totally frivolous or made up, or things that are going to solve some of the real world problems. So when you evaluate process, you can substitute some of those things, and that can apply at even the youngest of ages. So I have college students on my day-to-day, but I also work with kindergartners. And then you can talk about the process of communicating a dance. Right? So can you communicate a dance? How can you break down the steps? And that could be to another person, that can be playful and silly. And then can you do that to a program, or can you do that to a robot? Can you communicate to all of those? And, so the process for breaking something down and articulating just the order of things, can you do that repeatedly? And those are all things that can be evaluated across the entire spectrum.
Thank you so much. That's a really helpful way of framing it. Alison or Alexa, do you have any thoughts to add on this?
We haven't really evaluated play per se, but I think the way that I would get at looking at the impact of having play would be at things like attendance. Like, I think we have seen dramatic increases in attendance with in-person. I would look at things like that, like how are students enjoying school? What are the ways that they're connected to their school? And one of the most palpable ways to measure that is if they're actually coming to school. So, maybe I'm sure there are more creative ways to measure play itself, but I do think it's more about the students' connection and desire to be at school, connection to school, desire to be at school, that I think I would try to measure if I were measuring that.
Thank you. That's helpful. Alexa, anything to add before the next question?
I agree with Alison's statement, because we currently have the highest attendance in our district. We have a 96% attendance rate. And that's for in-person and 95% for remote. So I still go back to like that idea of the feeling, and that's obviously communicated with teachers, because they're helping students feel welcomed and loved and wanted in school. Our teachers' attendance is also very high as well. We don't have many teachers on medical accommodations either. For my whole staff, I only have 2. So having our whole staff and having our children come in and our families seeing that, just that feeling of feeling good about school and that sense of belonging. And when I think about fostering play skills, I don't think I've evaluated that, but it just makes me think about what Aman started mentioning in terms of how are you communicating the rules to the game, or how are you communicating how something works? And just the idea of taking turns, the importance of that in early childhood, and waiting your turn, and how to accept when you haven't won the game, and how do you react to that, and how do you respond to that. And those are things that we actually do at recess often, because our teachers are at recess with the students. That's new because of our current situation. And there I'm seeing them have conversations with, wait, but what happens when you lose? You could wait your turn. You can play in the next round. So just working through your emotions when those things happen. So it made me think about the idea of fostering play skills and just those things that are like happening at recess.
So Alexa, that actually ties into another question that came in the registration questions that I'd love to briefly ask before we jump to a Q&A question. To what extent do you all think, Alexa, you just answered this to some degree. To what extent do you think children now need to be taught the basics of playing together, play acting, or play exploration? Alison or Aman, do you have anything to add on what Alexa was saying?
Yeah, I do think that's an important part of what, a good preschool curriculum is, giving students an opportunity to play, having, dress up station and a sand table. So giving students access to that, because that is how we're all learning to be adults, is having that as, and as Aman said earlier, that initial scientific exploration of trying something and seeing the cause and effect of different things you're playing with. So there's a lot to be learned from that early piece of it. We have worked with groups before, like there's one in Baltimore, I think it's just Baltimore, they're called Playworks, that they actually help kids learn the rules of games and how do you, and again, resolve disputes, that as Alexa was referring to. There are groups that help with that. And I think that can be really important too. And then, as I talked about before, sports can be really important with that, is really helping students understand how do you, how you work together as a team towards an outcome, how do you resolve any differences in the team about how you're approaching it? How do you deal with the loss? I mean, those are all that's why we're kind of putting really investment in our coaches and assistant directors to help them be more than have the game be more about than just about winning. It's about what do you sport as a model for how you're learning about life and about how to deal with defeat or success graciously.
Thank you so much. Amon, anything to add?
There's play involves some improvisation a lot. There's many types of play, and Alison gave us the example of tag, having touchless tag now. And that's in addition to tunnel tag, freeze tag, any variant of tag that we've all seen and probably made up a few on our own. So the improvisation that comes with play is something that can be harnessed and fed into things like a popular splat activity is making different types of relay races and coming up with rules. And then based on, there's a little bit of like sports competition there. So then everyone gets to change the rules to change the balance. And so just playing with the space. If you have a space where physical movement is happening, you get the physical play. You get some of the rule changing and the improvisation, and you get to deal with dealing with the winning gracefully and with the being on the losing end by changing the rules and trying to spread that out and allowing others to bend it in their favor. So I think there's a lot of the just constantly improvising and creating new games from old games. And these are all things that go into music, creating remixes, and that go into programming, which is building a new program based on libraries from other programs. So I think that improvisation that's at the core of a lot of play has a lot of mileage.
Thank you so much. And Amon, the last question is for you, and then we'll wrap this up in a few minutes. So this question is asking, in developing play processes for learning in all aspects of STEM, what role does infrastructure play in accessibility?
That's one of the $1 million questions. So accessibility is getting a lot of attention right now. And some of what I've learned, and it's a work in progress, is that, infrastructure can be technological built world infrastructure as well as people and social infrastructure. So along those dimensions, making sure that people understand some of the points that I raised earlier, that every individual, not just from accessibility. I was introduced to a good framework that is not like, we think of accessibility of people that have physical impairments that you can see, like a visual impairment or audible impairment. But people, when it comes to learning and engaging in a space, you have to think about everyone's jagged profile, because everyone's attention is a little different, their interest, their capability. So if you think about the jagged profiles, you're trying to provide an environment and the infrastructure that has a way to engage that allows people to come in from a lot of different points and exit through a lot of points. And that's very difficult people think about the proposition of having multiple outputs or thinking about multiple inroads. But I think that's where we're having to go for people that have visible things that you can see and things that you can't see and different profiles. When you give that kind of infrastructure in anything that we do, from lessons to tools that we create, I think that's where things are going, and we're all going to try to collectively figure out how to do that effectively in the infrastructure that we have, which currently isn't necessarily best suited for that. When people are outnumbered by and have so many things and that are competing for their interests. So I think that we'll try to get there, but that's just a little bit of what I'm learning at the moment.
Thank you so much. Well, that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Alexa, Alison, and Amon, for your time and for sharing your experiences and your expertise. And thank you to all of you for joining and watching this webinar. The folks at Unruly Studios will be sending out a recording in case there's anything you'd like to revisit or look at again. And with that, thank you again and have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.